they used a very important principle of visualization, and that's called Gestalt. Gestalt roughly translates to pattern, and it's a collection of principles laid down by German psychologists in the 1920s to identify and predict how individuals interact with visual stimuli and how it influences the interpretation of data. These are really important principles to grasp as an analyst, and here are all of them now: proximity, similarity, closure, continuity, and connection. And now you also saw a principle in the video that taps into our pre-intended attribute of vision, and that is color. I cannot overstate the role that color plays in the comprehension of data. And of course you know that red and green stand out a lot in our culture because they're used to indicate negative and positive performance. The problem is, Excel's default color palettes in many cases apply both red and green in a totally arbitrary fashion. So you have to be really careful when you're formatting your charts so that the color palette doesn't actually mislead your audience. So this is a really important mantra. Don't let Excel's puky default color palette decide what matters to your executives. Okay? Now, the next mistake that we need to avoid, and this is the big one, is to cut the clutter. We are always cluttering our charts with noisy junk. And I can explain this better with a quick story. In another life, a marketing colleague came up to me so excited. They had just bought this fancy new dashboard software that he couldn't wait to show me because I'm with this lady. And I looked at it, and it was some company data visualized in the form of skyscraper buildings in a cartoon city. Now, this is not the actual software. I don't have access to that, but I was amazed it was actually pretty close to this. And we had all kinds of interesting things, like fluffy clouds in the sky and lazy pigeons perched on the roofs. You know, it had a lot of entertainment value, but it was a cognition nightmare. And I felt really bad because, you know, he was so excited to show it to me, and I'm sure that the look on my face kind of portrayed that I was screaming on the inside. And the irony of it is that the data he was visualizing had nothing to do with buildings or architecture. Sometimes I think business folks get really trapped in form over function, and they forget about the relevance and how we understand comprehending the data. And, you know, talking about dashboards, you know, you don't see this as often today, but dashboard tools grew from a design aesthetic that was intended to draw analogies from real life to data. You know, you don't have to be a car mechanic to understand your car dashboard, but we're not car mechanics in that immediately. That just doesn't apply. And the problem with all of this stuff, like the gauges and things like that, it adds to something called cognitive load, which is defined as the total amount of mental effort being used in the work of memory. And what that translates to is the higher the load on your viewer's brain, the harder they have to work to interpret it, and the less attention is paid to you. Remember, we want them to pay attention to you. So a concept that's really important to understand here, if you haven't already heard of it, is called data to ink ratio, meaning the proportion of graphics ink devoted to the non-redundant display of data information. And this is by Edward Tufte. He made this famous. And this is how he calculates it. And we don't have to get too caught up with this, but what it essentially boils down to is the higher the ratio of actual data to non-essential ink, the better it is for your audience's brain. Now, to be fair to us, the graphical noise that I see in most charts comes right from Excel's default settings. It's not really doing you any favors when it sets that up for you. So, you know, even though we have like a bar chart, one click of the mouse, and you get all of this extra junk on there that's just completely confusing the audience. I have presented so many untouched charts like this, I can't even count. And I'm pretty sure my VPs were like, what? So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna give this chart a really good spring cleaning. So I'm going to start with a 3D. I'm going to make this very quick. The 3D has no place in your charts. It's just a mess. Please don't do it. That's the end of the story. Yeah, man. Okay, so we found the 3D out, but this is kind of still a mess. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take out this border. It's just extra noise. We really don't need it. And what you're going to see is as we're going through this exercise, you see it just becoming cleaner and cleaner. It's really cool. So the next thing is that it's not sorted. When you have a bar chart, the most important thing that you can do is sort it. You're removing that extra work for your audience. So now they can rank very quickly. Now, the bar gap width is much too wide, so we're going to close that up to about 50 to 70% width. Excel's default is around 270%, so again, just got to make that change. Now, we have lots of extra decimal places. I see this one a lot. You know, most of our rates that we calculate, like bounce rate, are in the tens. So those extra decimal places are really not going to help you make any distinction. So we're just going to clean that up. Now, the grid lines. Grid lines really don't help that much. We will have a solution for that in a second. So we're going to get that out of there. The next thing, this axis. Don't really need that. Next, too many tick marks. Just don't need that many. So what I like to do is limit it to about 4 or 5 tick marks, because really that's all you need for comparison. Also now the font is a little too small unless you have really bionic vision. So what I like to do is start with a minimum of 20 points, and a little trick for making sure your font is the right size is you go to slide sorter view in PowerPoint, and if you can read it well, then your audience can see it too. Now, because we took away the grid lines, what we want to do is add data labels so that they're not guessing at all what each bar is. And now, maybe one of the most important things is this color palette. See, there's the red and the green, which means good or bad to us, but it doesn't mean anything here. So what I like to do is when I'm encoding one metric, I change the entire chart to a nice baseline gray color. And this really helps just unify everything for you. And then on the last step, strategic coloring to emphasize the key message that you're trying to make. And you know, a nice blue usually does well there. So after applying all of these principles, we're left with a visual that's easy to understand and free of any distractions from you. Now, some violations that I see also in other chart types are filling bars with patterns, symbols, or textures. Line markers, line markers on line charts. Overlapping data labels, very clear. And legends in time series charts. It takes a lot of work for their eyes to get from that itty bitty square up to the line. So the solution to this is labeling the ends of the line. You can do that with a data label really easily. And you can even go the extra mile by coloring the label so that now there's no question about what label belongs to what